Good morning to all of you. My name is Deborah Kahatano. I'm Chief of Party for VukaNow. I'm just going to give you a brief introduction about VukaNow activity just to create context. And when I'm done that, I'm going to invite USAID to give us our opening remarks. So as I mentioned earlier, VukaNow is a USAID-funded activity which has got an aim of supporting the shared commitments of the government of the United States of America, the SADC member states, private sector, and civil society in Southern Africa to significantly reduce the challenge that we are facing in terms of wildlife crime. As you all know, wildlife crime is a serious challenge in Southern Africa, and it robs the governments and communities who are the true custodians of resources. It robs them of resources, financial resources that they can gain from legal activities such as tourism and others, while enriching the organized crime syndicates. So this is a big challenge, and the United States government has partnered with government in Southern Africa to try to address this challenge. VukaNow has got two main objectives in terms of our contribution to combating wildlife crime in Southern Africa. VukaNow is supporting catalyzing learning and sharing for improved results to combat wildlife crime, because wildlife crime is a very serious crime, and then a multi-sector approach is required to address the challenge. So learning and sharing is critical, to learn from other sectors, to learn from other countries, and also to enhance collaborative action to reduce wildlife crime in targeted areas. So we are facilitating learning and sharing, as well as bringing partners together to support collaborative action, which is necessary to ensure that we contribute to combating wildlife crime in the region. USAID is part of the portfolio of activities that are funded by, VukaNow is part of the portfolio of activities that is supported by USAID Southern Africa. USAID Southern Africa is supporting some of the activities that are based on the landscapes. We are talking about Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, which covers 5 SADC member states, the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Areas, and Malawi, Zambia. So there are landscape activities that are based on the ground to promote activities to combat wildlife crime in those landscapes. But VukaNow is coming in as a complementary activities to facilitate sharing and collaboration among those landscape-based activities, but also to collaborate with other partners who are not necessarily working under the landscape or funded under the USAID portfolio of activities, but are critical to combat wildlife crime in Southern Africa, to collaborate with them, so to ensure that we work together towards a joint effort. So our approach, we are catalyzing learning and sharing among combating wildlife crime landscape partners. These are the ones that are being supported by USAID Southern Africa, but also we are encouraging other stakeholders to work together to support our activities to combat wildlife crime. We are also supporting some collaborative actions to combat wildlife crime, which is mainly supporting the implementation of the SADC law enforcement and the anti-poaching strategy. This is a regional framework that has been agreed to by SADC member states with the aim of bringing countries together to combat wildlife crime in Southern Africa, including the illegal wildlife trade. So this framework provides some activities that can be implemented at the regional level, and VukaNow is supporting the implementation, some components of this law enforcement and anti-poaching strategy. We are also supporting innovative and novel approaches to combat wildlife crime in the areas of technologies and tools that we can use to combat wildlife crime. We are also advancing capacity building for wildlife forensics. Forensics is critical in ensuring that we succeed in our efforts to combat wildlife crime. The criminals are high-tech, and when they are caught, they are using sophisticated lawyers to defend them. So the only way we can be able to support and maybe to have a successful conviction is the use of DNA. So we are trying to build capacity for use of wildlife forensics in Southern Africa to support our efforts to combat wildlife crime. We're also supporting investigative reporting on wildlife crime, and that I think where our partners Oxpeckers come in. We do also have a grants facility where we're issuing grants to specific organizations to support some targeted interventions in different areas that are necessary to combat wildlife crime. This also involves community engagement. We all know that community stewardship is critical to support. Enforcement is one side of the coin to fight wildlife crime, but also we have to be coupled with issues around community engagement and community stewardship to wildlife, because communities are the first line of defense against wildlife crime. We're also working towards leveraging partnership with the private sector, because private sector is key partners and has resources and capacities and skills in terms of implementing different activities as far as development is concerned, wildlife crime inclusive. So we'd like to leverage resources and partnership in the private sector to ensure that we operate at scale and also we adequate resources and we don't duplicate efforts. When it comes to media engagement, which is more relevant for today's event, we do have an objective under our activities, which is to increase collaborative action to reduce wildlife crime in targeted areas, like I mentioned earlier. And under it, we have an intermediate results, which is about improved transparency and reporting on wildlife crime. So under that, we are working with media and journalists. We do have a number of activities that we're supporting. For example, we've been hosting events and communication on wildlife conservation days to raise awareness about combating wildlife crime. This is to media and of course to general public to ensure that they're aware of different aspects of wildlife and the challenges facing wildlife and what they can do to contribute towards combating this crime. We have been also hosting media roundtables to facilitate discussions and foster community of practice among wildlife crime journalists to share some experiences, to learn from each other so that they can improve their reporting. We've also developed a resources for supporting reporting. For example, recently we launched a wildlife crime reporting handbook or toolkit, which we think it can help journalists to provide them information about to understand, to great understanding of wildlife crime, but also to see what they can do and give them some tools on what they can do to improve their reporting. We are also working at skill development for journalists for improved techniques and methods in wildlife crime reporting. And this, of course, our partnership with Oxpeckers become critical in this regard. Then I just wanted to highlight that we do have some other platforms and resources that as a media can benefit from. We do have an online platform, which we call VukaNow. This platform offers a number of courses in different aspects of combating wildlife crime. Among them is combating wildlife crime as a journalist. So this is an exciting self-paced module that offers tips and ideas that you can use to write wildlife crime stories and examples how to design investigation and compose stories and reports in a more creative way with the aim of deterring wildlife crime. So we're encouraging you to visit VukaNow. Belinda Glenn, my colleague, her contact details are down there. She can provide more information on how we can register and participate in the training. So we really encourage you to participate because by doing so, you can increase your understanding and appreciation of root causes of wildlife crime. What are the consequences of wildlife crime to the region and to the economies of the countries, and also what you can do to contribute. And also you can also access other tools and a library of information that is contained in our online platform. So we encourage you to participate. And Belinda Glenn, my colleague, is the main contact person. You can reach out to her and she can provide more information on how you can benefit from it. So without further ado, let me take this opportunity to introduce the next speaker. The next speaker is Angela Hogg. She's the Regional Education, Environment and Democracy Director at USAID. Angela Hogg joined USAID as a Foreign Service Officer in 2005. Most recently, she was the Director of the Regional Environment Office in Bangkok, Thailand. Prior to Thailand, she worked with USAID in Mozambique, Cambodia, and Bangladesh on a wide range of environment and private sector programs. Angela is passionate about pursuing integrated programming and enjoys developing creative, holistic solutions to development challenges. Prior to joining USAID, she was a Peace Corps volunteer in Bolivia and worked on a variety of development projects in Baja California, Mexico, Fiji, and Bolivia. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia in archaeology and foreign affairs and a master's from the University of California, San Diego in development economics. Angela, her husband Daniel, and son Oliver are excited to be back in Southern Africa and look forward to exploring the region. Angela, over to you.
Thank you, Deborah, and good morning to all of our participants today. I'm honored to join you on behalf of the United States Agency for International Development as we bring the media and conservationists together to launch the Wild Eyes Southern Africa tool and to celebrate and highlight the outstanding work undertaken under the VukaNow grant implemented by Oxpeckers. USAID has long shown an interest in improving the capacity of regional media to report on several issues, and combating wildlife crime is certainly one of those priority areas. Wildlife crime is a multi-billion-dollar illicit business that is decimating Africa's iconic species and undermining the economic prosperity and sustainable development of countries and communities throughout Southern Africa. It threatens the region's natural capital and undermines economic gains from legal nature-based enterprises such as ecotourism. Wildlife crime also threatens social stability and cohesion as it robs citizens of their cultural and natural heritage, while its organized criminal networks threaten regional peace and security. The media has a crucial role to play in the collective effort to reduce wildlife crime through how it reports on this issue. The words, images, and angles chosen all have an effect, which can be positive or negative. Globally, the media industry is under pressure and faces harsh economic realities that often result in fewer resources, which can impact specialized reporting on issues such as wildlife crime. Many newsrooms end up relying on wire copy and often only have stories that have national appeal will make it to the cut. It does not help that environmental journalism is one of the most dangerous areas of reporting. Journalists need as much support as possible. Oxpeckers is Africa's first journalistic investigation unit focusing on environmental issues. The unit combines traditional investigative reporting with data analysis and geomapping tools to expose eco-offenses and track organized criminal syndicates in Southern Africa and their links across the globe. Its aims include building the capacity for and improving the impact of African environmental journalism by providing a home for investigative journalists interested in environmental issues. Oxpeckers applied for support from USAID through the grants mechanism, and there was a clear synergy between their objectives and ours. The work Oxpeckers has undertaken with USAID support will strengthen the capacity of journalists to investigate and report on wildlife crime through improved collection and sourcing of CWC data and strengthening information systems for sharing and analyzing such. Oxpeckers has and will continue to collect and collate data sets on seizures, arrests, court cases, and convictions relating to CWC. Sharing information based on the analysis of data will be strengthened by creating the exciting open source digital resource of CWC data, including data court cases, that is being launched today, Wild Eye Southern Africa. Over the past months, Oxpeckers has been providing crucial mentoring and training on how to report on wildlife crime to selected journalists, which again is aligned with USAID's commitment to improving the capacity of regional media. Today, we'll hear more from those journalists about how this learning has unfolded for them and how it will impact their work from now on. Today's event is the culmination of months of hard work as we launch the Wild Eye Southern Africa tool that Oxpeckers has worked tirelessly to develop and hear from the individuals that they have supported. But it's also just the beginning of an exciting new opportunity for journalists to form a community of practice and to put this tool to good use. As someone who only recently returned to the region, but has worked on wildlife crime in both Africa and Asia, I'm encouraged to see USAID's collaboration with Oxpeckers to fill this important gap in CWC reporting. I want to thank you for your commitment and dedication to shining a light on environmental and CWC issues in the region, and I look forward to learning more about your efforts today. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Deborah and Angela for your insights as well as your support. It's really encouraging to see this kind of support in combating wildlife crime in the region. As you will continue to see during the course of this morning, there is now a move towards these types of innovative and collaborative approaches. We look forward to seeing where the project goes, and we're very grateful to have USAID, VukaNow, and VukaLearn as part of the Wild Eye community. I'll now be handing over to our technical advisor and learning specialist, Derek DeToy, who will give us an overview of the Wild Eye training and professional support program. He'll briefly cover the course design, the learning process, the program's key themes, products, as well as the VukaLearn online course. Over to you, Derek.
Thanks for that introduction, Andisa, and thanks for those previous presentations that give quite a nice background to what we are attempting to do. I'm going to talk specifically about the course design for the training component. Thank you. Roxanne, next one. Right, so we've called it the Oxpeckers Professional Support and Training Platform. And really, I'm going to talk really how the training was designed and how we went about working with investigative journalists in Southern Africa. The real attempt there was to improve the abilities of those journalists to report on wildlife crime. Next. Right, our footprint. We drew on journalists from Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, South Africa, and Mozambique. And then we also drew on research associates and people who we've worked with previously in Asia and in Europe on earlier iterations of the tool, and they came in and brought experience to the program. And on the right, you see our 5 data wranglers or data journalists, and you're going to be hearing from them shortly. They'll tell you about the experiences and the learning process that they underwent. Next. Right, in terms of what we tried to achieve, we were trying to build knowledge, but not only knowledge in conjunction with skills to improve a particular suite or set of practices. And those practices were really about being more effective as a data journalist working in wildlife crime. So in terms of that little graphic, there are 3 bands there. The focus is what I can't do. And we weren't really going in and picking up people who had no experience of journalism whatsoever. We looked rather at the central band. It's what I can do, but with assistance. And that's why we call it the professional support program. We were looking really at journalists who had experience in the region, maybe not so much experience with wildlife crime, but we're interested to learn more about it. And that's the kind of support that we gave them. The group which features as what I can do, we drew those people into our mentorship group, and you'll hear about that next. So next slide. Right, there was an in-depth mentorship program, and that's largely what you're going to hear about this morning. There were also other angles to the process, but essentially there you see the triangle with mentorship in the middle, the 2 foundations. On the left, you see the foundation of knowledge and skills, but also the application of those. Not just about learning more about the concepts, but also being able to apply them in practice. And so there was a big focus on action learning. And then to the right, you see the other foundation are the tools such as Wild Eye and various other tools that these journalists could use to improve their practice. The long-term goal really at the top of that triangle is to produce quality data-driven stories for combating wildlife crime. And then to the right, you see our group of mentors who brought their experience to the table, and I gather some of them are in the room today. All right, next. Just a little bit more about the in-depth professional support and training aspect. Simply put, there were 4 modules with a standard format, and that was conducted over a 5-month program. So it was quite intensive. There always was a work away or professional task to encourage action learning. So we asked the data journalists to go out and collect data. We set them data targets. You'll hear about that a little later. We asked them to use the law to access information, legal instruments and their application. We asked them to sign up and complete the VukaLearn course, which you heard about earlier. And then we also went a step further into the data analysis and visualization of their data sets. All right. And then the learning was structured around 4 themes, 4 modules. Quickly, and you will hear about these in detail from the data journalists themselves. The first was enhancing investigative environmental journalism with data, the focus being on their working with good, solid data. And then module 2, using the law to access wildlife crime. I mentioned that. And then module 3, tools of the trade, largely working with instruments such as data management tools, but also working with Wild Eye Southern Africa and actually building their data sets into that tool. And the last module was, you also heard from Deborah talking about building a strong community of practice. And that was largely about scaling people up so that they can work more effectively at a regional level rather than just being confined to the borders of their countries. Lastly, we've recognized their efforts through a certificate, and each of the participants will be given such a certificate. Next, please. Just in terms of data journalism as a practice, sometimes people are not so clear what is the difference between data journalism and investigative journalism. And there is quite a big difference in terms of the different components or activities that make it up. So just a quick look at that. We'll take you through it. The first step or stage of that is getting data. It's the arduous task of finding the data. Next. After that's been done, there's a series of processes which entail paying for information, using open access, scraping the internet. But there's also sometimes a need to use legal processes to access data that's not easily available. And then once one has the data, one has to clean it. Is it legitimate? Is it accurate? And some of the data actually cannot proceed beyond that point, has to be rejected. There are tools to help us do that, and we spend time on that. And then that takes you further, Roxanne. So the next stage is going to understanding the data once you have it. It's putting the pieces of the puzzle together, looking for patterns and trends, and then also seeing, are there stories that data can tell? And that sometimes involves different skills, maybe even different people. And then the last step in this whole process is delivering that data. And so it's where the data journalists have to combine their data sets with a particular story or theme, depending on what they would like to achieve. This is where they get to use instruments like WildEye. They also use other various instruments to visualize data and make it more easy to understand, because they need to take that to the final stage, which is the audience, which could be decision makers, could be the community to try and mobilize them, or even government departments who have obligations in terms of compliance and ensuring that standards are being met. Right? That's a practice for you. Thank you. And then the last slide is just to give you a sense of what products you can expect coming from the program, and you will hear about these during the morning. The first being the actual WildEye Southern Africa tool, which we're very proud to be able to launch today and make available for journalists in the region. There will be a toolbox for data journalists who are interested in improving their practices, tips and tools and things that can actually refine their practice. We will also put out learning narratives that track the learning of our 5 participants, and you will hear about that shortly. There will also be data sets available on the WildEye Southern Africa instrument. We also then have a course curriculum and content, which we've now tested, and potentially can be repeated and go to a higher level. And then lastly, we believe that we've actually started with building a community of practitioners in the Southern African region that are not just investigative journalists, but are actually there to collect, synthesize, and provide good quality data for combating wildlife crime. So thank you very much. And we'd like to say we're looking forward to hearing from our data journalists, and it's over to you and to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Derek, for that very detailed overview of the WildEye training and professional support program. We'll now move on to the launch of the WildEye Southern Africa tool. So 3 years ago, we launched our first WildEye mapping tool, and this year, with the help of our donors, team, and data wranglers, we've come back to our roots in Africa. WildEye Southern Africa is a powerful tool that we hope will provide a deeper understanding of wildlife crime in the region. This is the result of more than just months of hard work, and while it's focused in the Southern Africa region, its impact is global. With that, I invite you to join us in the fight against wildlife crime. We'll now be doing a walkthrough of the tool. WildEye is an open source mapping tool that provides public access to information on wildlife trafficking and other environmental crimes in Southern Africa. Developed by journalists for journalists, it maps seizures, arrests, court cases, and convictions. It was created to track and share data on justice in action and contains information on legal interventions. Until now, there has been no single place to access information easily on efforts to crack down on environmental crimes in the region. How does WildEye work? There are currently 4 different versions of the tool: WildEye Global, WildEye Europe, WildEye Asia, and WildEye Southern Africa. You can find the maps on the Oxpeckers homepage by selecting the WildEye button under Explore Our Maps and Tools. You will then find yourself on the WildEye Maps page. On the left-hand side, there's a list of all the maps, links to related resources, and a search and filter function. Select the map that you would like to interact with. In this case, we will select WildEye Southern Africa, and all of the cases pertaining to this part of the world will appear on the map. The maps are populated with icons containing information about a seizure, an arrest, a court case, or a conviction, as per the interactive filter. The default display on the maps is all categories. And if you only want information about one category, click on the filter in the top left of the map. Click on any icon and a text box will pop up, providing detailed information about what products were seized, who was arrested, and how much they were fined, for example. The tool includes a search function at the top left to help users filter information and find topics of interest. If you want to learn about illegal trade in rhinos, for instance, simply type rhino in the search box and you'll get results covering seizures, arrests, court cases, and convictions involving that word. You can use the alert system on the maps to subscribe to receive alerts on either an area or a specific case. Each time the data is updated, you will receive an email with this information. You can unsubscribe or stop alerts at any time via email. How can journalists use the map? Journalists can use WildEye to track specific data, patterns, or trends for use in their investigations. At the click of a button, WildEye can show you where law enforcement efforts are concentrated in Zimbabwe, for instance, and whether this is leading to judicial certainty. Another example is, are there more arrests in South Africa than in Mozambique, and why? Use WildEye to ask questions such as, why are there more seizures in some countries than others? Is this due to more intense controls or to the preference smugglers have for certain routes? You can also ask, why do so few seizures result in prosecutions and fewer still convictions? Journalists can use the data to identify cases on which to build new stories through court records or freedom of information requests. As you will hear from one of our data wranglers just now, our data analysis indicates that wildlife crime in some of the countries in the region is on the increase. They will also provide highlights of what they discovered during their data collection and analysis, and how this fits into the bigger picture. For more information on how you can use WildEye, click on Guide for Journalists in the bottom left-hand corner. Journalists are encouraged to share data via the tool whenever they come across it. If you know of any seizures, arrests, prosecutions, or convictions that are not on WildEye, you can do this by clicking on Reach Out in the bottom left-hand corner under Get Involved. You can also request access to WildEye data to use in your research and investigations. Do this by clicking on Get WildEye Data in the bottom left-hand corner. One of the goals of WildEye is to build on our dossier of stories based on the tool's data. The stories produced through the help of WildEye data are featured on our investigations page on the Oxpeckers site and by partner media outlets. You can suggest a story by once again clicking on Reach Out in the bottom left-hand corner under Get Involved. We look forward to hearing about your experiences with WildEye Southern Africa and would like to welcome you to our ever-growing community. We'll now take any questions about the platform, how it works, what you can do with it. Okay, not seeing any questions, but we do have a raised hand from Annika. So I'll unmute you and you can share your question. Hi, Annika, I've given you permission to unmute yourself, so you can go ahead and ask your question. Okay, not a problem. Okay, so that was an unintentional raised hand, but we do have some comments from Aletta, who says this is really cool. And we also have a comment from Alistair, who says this would be really cool to check environmental prosecution performance and the severity of consequences for environmental criminals in the region, as well as court performances. We have a question from Lara Roll, who asks how regularly the database is updated. Roxanne, would you like to take that question as our resident data wrangler?
Sure, thanks, Andiswa, and thanks for your question, Lara. The database is updated, quite simply put, as regularly as possible. We do weekly updates on pretty much all of our different maps, the 4 that you can see here, and then Oxpeckers has various other tools that we continuously update, but sometimes we receive mass updates or mass updated data from NGOs, monitoring organizations, or the journalists and data wranglers who we're working with, in which case we will do quite a big update. So they are regularly updated, and we try to remain abreast of what's happening in the region. But I must just say that this is obviously just what you see here is just a drop in the ocean, and it's an ongoing long-term project.
Thank you so much for that, Roxanne. We have another comment from Alistair saying that it would also be cool if the platform could show possible links to other organized criminal networks. I think that's a really good idea, and we'll probably leave that to the people at VukaNow, and maybe Roxanne and other wild eye people can have more ideas on how we can bring that together. And then we have another question from Annette, who's asking how the database is different from Traffic's wildlife trade portal. Roxanne, would you like to take that again?
Sure, thanks for your question, Annette. It's different in that, so sorry, first I should say that we do work with Traffic, and we do extract data from their fantastic wildlife trade portal. What's different about it is that we are publishing data from the perspective of journalists and data analysts. So it's less of a portal that leads to other bits of information about wildlife crimes, and it's more aimed at journalists and researchers, law enforcement, government, etc., who want to get an overview based on current research and investigations. In some cases, there's more detail on our map. In other cases, there's more detail on Traffic's map. But as I say, with these kinds of things, there is a lot of crossover, and we do share our data with one another.
Thank you so much for that, Roxanne. We have another question from Alexandra, and they're asking, how could researchers obtain permission to use some of the data in the studies? I'll ask Oxpeckers Executive Director, Fiona McLeod, to take that question. Fiona, you can unmute yourself and respond to that.
Thanks, Andiswa. I was actually answering to Annette's question about the traffic data portal. A big difference I see between the data that they have on the traffic portal and what we are sharing relates to the fact that we are tracking the outcomes of court cases and convictions related to wildlife crime. So often one can access information on arrests and seizures, plus of WildEye and our other related tools is that we are liberating data related to court cases and convictions. In respect of Alexandra's question, as Roxanne pointed out earlier, on the platform you'll find an interactive link to a menu called Get WildEye Data. So you could either reach out to us via that link, or you could email us directly. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Fiona. I'm not seeing any other questions on our Q&A box or the chat box. So I guess we'll be moving on to the next part of today's session. Just another reminder, please do remember to use the Q&A box for questions so that some of the questions may be answered while we're in session and some will be answered live, just like we did just now. So you're now going to hear about the journey that our data wranglers took over the past few months. They were tasked with completing the VukaLearn course to get an overall understanding of combating wildlife crime in the region. They then started collecting information about wildlife crime cases within the last few years, which meant interacting with law enforcement and government officials. They also worked with NGOs and monitoring organizations to consolidate and analyze data from the countries where they are based. And these countries were Botswana, Malawi, Mozambique, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. At each turn, our data wranglers were challenged and had to come up with new and innovative ways of getting the information that they needed. Having access to VukaLearn resources assisted with this process as it gave them guidance and direction throughout the process. They will each be dealing with a different topic and sharing their insights on tips and tools for investigations, using the law to access data, turning data into stories, and the way forward. First up, we'll hear from our Malawi journalist, Mbawo Chavula, about her experiences of the Ivuka Learn course. Mbawo, can you please tell us what you learned from the course and how you'll be taking these lessons forward?
Good morning. Thank you so much. I think I cannot say much about the course because the one person spoke before me and they eloquently talked about how important it is. It is a tool that every journalist, I think, needs. And looking at what we found out during this course, the crisis of actually killing animals is really, really bad in our region. And all of us actually have to take turns or have to take a step to ensure that it stops. So this course will help every journalist, any journalist who would want to actually pursue this. They have got very beautiful tools. You just need to go to that course. I'm sure it is open. I think somebody said that already. Definitely for me, I always go back because I'm still with this course up to January. So I have so many resources at my fingertips now, and I would encourage each and every person to actually attend this course. They might not be on the Ivuka Learn course formally, but definitely for any journalist, it is a very vital tool. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mbao. Much appreciated. Next up, we'll hear from our Botswana journalist, Callistus Busaletse.
My name is Callistus Busaletse. I'm a Botswana journalist interested in managing data with traditional reporting. In doing so, I aim to publish compelling insight and moving stories. My areas of focus are data and investigative journalism. These are important in revealing trends and the truth about important stories that are in the public interest. During this course to learn new skills and tools of the trade in environmental and conservation news. Collaboration through such training is crucial as it opens doors to collaborate with other data journalists on illegal wildlife stories in certain countries. The tips and the tools that I use for investigating wildlife crime. There are lots of different databases and organizations that deal with illegal wildlife trade issues, such as traffic. These are important sources for data collections. But I've seen that with my experience in collecting data within this database, my experience is that donors dealing with environmental wildlife crime seem to hold much monopoly on who should have access to information, and it doesn't really involve everyone. Says we are in Botswana, and we also as journalists we need to be playing our role in fighting illegal wildlife crime, and even the communities. And if journalists they don't have access to this information, I might ask myself whether communities that we actually reside within areas where illegal wildlife crime take place, whether they have such kind of information. And I'm thinking donors shouldn't be controlling such information in that manner. Illegal wildlife crime involves a number of people and countries, so there's always a need to look for information about cases from several countries. It is also crucial to cultivate good relationship with law enforcement officials, non-profit organizations, the courts, and newsmakers who can help to gather information. You get to know your data well, so that you have a good sense of what information you already have and what you need to keep looking for. I think what is needed also when you collect data is that you should always compare your data, because most of these database you'll see that they provide public available information, and you might be collecting same data, but if you don't compare and contrast, you might have information that is always looking at the information that is the same.
Thank you so much for that, Callistus. I have a question for you to kick things off. Can you tell us what advice you'd give to other journalists in the region who are trying to get access to this kind of information?
Oh, okay. Come again. I didn't get your question.
No problem. What advice would you give to other journalists in the region who are trying to get access to this kind of information?
Yeah. Well, what you need to do is you need to look for different data sets. Especially traffic has a public available data set which we actually use called Wildlife Trade Portal. They also have a database called a quad tracker. The quad tracker one, I actually experienced difficulty in accessing information because I think it's closed and it can only be accessed by government departments, of which they are working with Department of Public Prosecution here in Botswana. So the public prosecution probably they are updating them about our cases that are taking place here. So you could also use social media. Social media, I think, is the most important. It's also important in trying to find data about wildlife crime. Also, Environmental Investigative Agency. Also, you can still access. So it's more about trying to fish around in a number of databases and try to compare if such information is the same. Also, if you, after collecting this, I think also you might approach the different departments for them to actually help with information. But with the absence of law, I think with the absence of freedom of information law in Botswana, I think we're experiencing difficulty because sometimes I think my experience is that they feel like they are not obliged to actually give us information, but we keep going back to them, and all this stuff. So really, that's my advice that I can give to our listeners.
Thank you so much for that, Callistus. Do we have any other questions for Callistus from the floor before we move on? Okay, then we'll be hearing again from Bao, this time talking about the challenges with getting official data from law enforcement.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mbao Chavola. I am what we would call a veteran journalist. I have worked in the profession since 1998 when I was about 19 years old, so I've grown up within the system. For me, I've always taken journalism as a calling, and indeed it has proven to be what I've always wanted to do in my life. I've never wanted to do anything else. As for data, I began working with data, or rather I developed an interest in it when I joined the Women in News program on leadership. That was in 2019. That was actually my first time to get to know about data journalism. I wasn't much interested in it, but I slowly realized that it is now taking over. If you don't know or don't do data journalism, definitely you're missing out something. My experience in collecting data using the law in this country, it was a very sad experience because whoever I talked to, they never actually wanted to even listen to what I had to say. There were others who would pretend that they were listening to me, they would pretend to oblige, but when it came for the time for me to actually be given what I wanted, they would just disappear. On WhatsApp, they would give me a blue tick, my phone would just ring. I wrote them formal emails. Some actually responded and said, "We have heard you, we'll come back to you." And the time was just passing by. I just had to find unconventional means now of looking for it. I worked like a mad woman, I can tell you, because I was just going flat out on Google, looking at so many things, wildly searching for the information. And I found it. I found actually more than I had hoped for. But I should say that it was really a struggle. And I only managed to do this because I have been in the journalism system for some time, so I know where to look. It would not be easy for somebody who is just starting out to actually get the information that I managed to get. Anyway, that's all in the past, but I would say that if you really want something, if you really want to get the information and you have a deadline and you want to honor that deadline, you will find what you want. But I must still say that I'm very disappointed with the people who are supposed to give us information for free because we have an Access to Information Act in Malawi, which is supposedly working, but they just ignore it. Anyway, if you really want it, you get it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mbao. I also have a question for you. Can you tell us a bit more about your experience with trying to get official data, specifically from the Department of National Parks and Wildlife? What were some of the challenges that you faced, and where did you eventually get your data from?
When I first spoke to the director of wildlife, he told me that he was just recovering from COVID and was in self-isolation.
Sorry, Mbao, I think there might be some issues with your microphone and we can't really hear you. Can you maybe try moving closer to the speaker?
How about here? Can you hear me now?
That's perfect.
All right. I was saying that the first time I connected with the director of Parks and Wildlife, he was recovering from COVID and he referred me to somebody else in his office. That person referred me to somebody else. That other person referred me to two other people. And the other two people that I last was referred to, they never even responded. I phoned them, they did not even pick up. I sent WhatsApp messages, they never picked. I sent emails, they never responded. The only people that responded to my emails were from the High Court and the police. These just responded acknowledging that they had received my emails, but then they never followed up. If I tried to send them more messages, they would just put me on read. I know that they read my messages, but they chose not to respond to what I had to say. I put it very clearly what I wanted from them, and they chose not to give it to me. So I had to go, now I had a deadline to have 100 data points by a certain date. So I now had to spend a lot of time searching, browsing through so much on the internet. I just went flat out looking, just putting in keywords, search words, anything that could actually bring up the situation of wildlife in Malawi. Fortunately, I found a database from the Department of Wildlife itself. They have a very comprehensive database where they put all the prosecutions, all the arrests and seizures. They put it there, but they choose rather. Hello?
Well, we can still hear you.
Okay. They'd rather put it on their website than actually talk to someone. But if you don't know that they have that particular website, because I even had trouble accessing that website, if you don't know about it, you just believe that there is no data anywhere, and you just rely on the newspapers maybe and the radios if they actually get that information. So it was really tough.
Thank you so much for that, Mbao. It's really commendable that you had to think outside the box and use other means to access the data when you were getting the runaround and not getting the answer from the national department. Do we have any other questions from Mbao? Okay, so if we don't have any questions, we'll be moving on to our next guest, Sean Ndlovu from Zimbabwe.
My name is Sean Ndlovu, and I work in Zimbabwe for the Center for Innovation and Technology. My main interest is in data-related stories with a focus on politics, environmental crimes, and hard news. So long there is data to play with, I am captivated and interested. I joined this course to improve my skills for wildlife crime reporting, to be part of a bigger network, publish improved data visualized stories, and highlight the important work that we do here at Wild Eye. One of our tasks was to turn data we have been collecting into story ideas over the past year, and to give our audience an overview of wildlife crimes in Southern Africa. Here is what our data has showed. Wildlife crime in the region is on the rise, and despite travel restrictions, traffickers are finding new ways to sell goods in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, there are certain hotspots where these crimes originate. These include the Bubi Valley Conservancy. The country struggles with resources to protect its small rhino population, and to note there are only several hundred rhinos left in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe has a dehoning program to make rhinos less attractive to poaching targets. Zimbabwe's endangered pangolin population is also under constant threat to Southern Eastern Asian poachers. In South Africa, there are more seizures and arrests than there are court cases and successful prosecutions. According to WildEye data, between 15 to 18% of cases over the past 4 years have resulted in successful convictions. In Malawi, the demand for pangolins and their scales, as well as elephant tusks and ivory, remains high, and trafficking continues to be rampant in that country. In Botswana, there is an increase in rhino poaching, yet there are few seizures or arrests. There is also an unwritten shoot to kill policy against poachers, and the country has come under fire for this, with at least 12 people suspected of poaching killed in 2020. There is still a lot of work to be done in the region, and our hope with WildEye Southern Africa is that other journalists, researchers, non-governmental organizations, and officials join us in this fight to make wildlife crime data easily available and publicly accessible by all.
Thank you so much for that, Sean. I also have a question for you. What does the data say about the overall situation of wildlife crime in the region? Are things really as bad as the news make it out to be, or is the situation actually improving?
Please come again.
Right. So what does the data say about the overall situation of wildlife crime in the region? Are things really as bad as the news make it out to be, or would you say the situation is actually improving?
All right. So like I alluded to, there is an increase of poaching and wildlife crimes in the region. Yes, the data is telling us another story, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. It is a bit bad. I wouldn't say that we're winning the war against wildlife crime, but it is not as good as we want it to be. We need a more concerted effort to try and push back and report more on cases, and also see more seizures and convictions in court cases. That's what the data is telling me. So in South Africa, like I said, there are more, the wildlife crimes are on the rise, like poaching, but there are less seizures than the court cases. So yes, the data is telling us that there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Thank you so much for that, Sean. We have another question from Hafawa, and they're asking that poaching is often a cross-border crime. Do journalists from different countries collaborate on the same project? Hi, Sean, you're muted.
So when we're doing this project with WildEye, we were put into 5 countries and different teams, and we've been talking about that we should create a hub whereby journalists in these 5 different countries, we sit down and sift through the data, and then we try and track some stories, because what normally happens in the Bubi Conservancy, people will come and poach rhinos or elephant tusks. Then the next minute you hear that they have come out in Mozambique. They were at the court in Mozambique, but the rhino ones came from Zimbabwe or Zambia or Botswana. So we as WildEye, and hopefully after this exercise, as a team of our data wranglers, we kind of like agree that we'll create a buddy system or create a hub whereby we'll be reporting on these cases cross borders, because it's not one country has been affected, it's the whole southern region that's affected, and there seems to be a syndicate and a network. And from memory, if memory serves me well, there is a famous poacher who's wanted in Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Zambia, but somehow he's held up in Zambia. No one can touch him. So we need to report more on that so that they could be easily tracked and also to have convictions coming through. So yes, collaboration will make our jobs a lot easier as journalists and also as data wranglers.
Thank you so much for that, Sean, much appreciated. And finally, we'll now hear from our South African journalist, Nompumelelo Mthweni.
My name is Nompumelelo Mthweni. I live in South Africa and I work with data and multimedia. My work is focused on communicating and producing meaningful stories that aim to drive positive impact in our society by harnessing multimedia and data. I joined this course to improve my ability to collect, to clean and understand data, to learn more about wildlife crime in the region, and to forge a diverse collaboration with other skilled data wranglers and mentors across the region. My fellow data wranglers have discussed our top tips and tools for reporting on wildlife crime, our shared struggle with using the law to access this information, and how to turn data like this into a compelling story or stories. I'm going to end off with a few of our learnings and the way forward. So what we've learned throughout this course is that data is more about people than it is about numbers. Always include a human or a humanity element to any story that you tell, even if the numbers drive it. We learn also that we need to treat all data with skepticism because numbers do not always equal facts. And sometimes there is an agenda with the accessibility of data or lack thereof. So one needs to understand the process and context before you dive in it. Don't just use data as confirmation on your hypothesis. Rather, try to understand what it is that it is telling you. We've learned, again, that we need to use multiple sources and databases when you're doing research and verifying information. And if you're determined to get data, you will definitely find a way to make it happen. And now we're going to look at our way forward. So it's a plan on forging ahead. We are aiming to keep pushing for access to information. We will continue cultivating relationships with officials and those with access to information. We'll follow up with requests and keep adding data to our growing database. We will publish and encourage other journalists to publish data-driven investigations using #WildEye Southern Africa Map. And finally, we'll collaborate with other data wranglers and grow our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Lelo. And a question for you, Lelo. What advice do you have for other data journalists wanting to use WildEye as part of their investigations or research? So the response from Lelo is that journalists wanting to use the WildEye tool as part of their investigative purposes is that they should use the tool and they should use it exhaustively. And what she means by that is that they should use all features that are presented by the tool, because not only is WildEye useful for making wildlife crime data accessible to all, but there are other instrumental features worth exploring. Features like getting updates and alerts when data changes. So it's extremely important to use the click to get alerts feature, to subscribe in order to get notified when data changes, as these notifications can help with the development of investigations because they track changes over specific data over time. For example, what an outcome of a court case was at a point in time. Besides getting updated about the data changes, data journalists can also add new data to the WildEye map. So if you have a relevant and useful data set, there's a feature there's a feature in the tool that allows them to do so. All right, thank you so much for that, Lelo. If there's any other questions for Lelo, please pop them into the Q&A box and will respond to those during the session. Thank you to each of our data wranglers for their insights and for sharing their experiences with us. We thank you so much for your contribution to Wildeye Southern Africa and for being a continued part of our community. We would now like to take a bit of time to allow for a general discussion and inputs from our participants. I'd like to kick off with a question for either Angela or Deborah from USAID. I think let's go for Angela. Can you please expand a bit on the thinking behind the VukaLearn platform as a virtual tool, as opposed to traditional in-person workshops, as well as the philosophy behind its content?
Hi, Andy. So this is Deborah.
Hi, Deborah.
I think Angela has, she's not on the call at the moment.
Okay.
So maybe I can try, let me respond. Yeah. So in terms of, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. In terms of VukaLearn, the idea that we came about is to come up with a learning platform, of course, online, to enable people to access at their own pace, conduct the training at their own time, at the comfort of their homes, and also to use it as a deposit of information, whereby you can access as much information as possible. So this concept started even before COVID-19 started. We had agreed already to work on the online learning platform, of course, going with the trends, growing in technology, and also offer accessibility to people at the convenience of their time, because sometimes bringing people together is expensive, it's time consuming, people are busy with their day job. But I think if the information is sitting somewhere and you know about it, you can access it at the comfort of your own time. So that is the idea of coming up with the VukaLearn started. And we do have a number of courses on the VukaLearn. Like I said, we are familiar with the courses for journalists, but we do have a number of courses also that are geared towards park managers, reserve park managers or managers of the reserves. So the course will be geared about what they're supposed to be doing in terms of combating wildlife crime. The course for journalists will be also tailor-made for specific aspects that journalists can contribute. We also have courses targeted for custom and immigration officers, because as we know, wildlife crime is transnational. After poaching for wildlife animals, so you either transport those animals or their products, not only locally, but also internationally. So trafficking comes into play. So the courses for immigration and custom officials help them to be part of the process in terms of combating wildlife trafficking or trafficking of wildlife products that is possessed illegally and trafficked illegally. We do also have courses for forensic science. I spoke about forensic science and DNA that are part and parcel of cracking wildlife crime and secure successful conviction of these cases. So we do have also courses for that is targeted for prosecutors and magistrates, but is geared, it talk about wildlife forensic science so that they can understand what is wildlife forensics and how they can accept it during the conducting of cases in the courts. We do have also courses for illegal wildlife trade that is geared towards judicial system to raise the awareness of the judiciary about wildlife crime. What are the contents of wildlife crime? How can we address it? And this one is a bit different from other courses because it's a combination of a self-paced course where you can take a course at your own pace, but this one is a 5-week course. It is structured in a way that you can take it at your own time, but each week, because there are 5 modules and each module is 1 week, but each week you have to have a webinar with a subject matter expert, which is moderated, and it brings together all the course participants to exchange information, and also presentation from the subject matter expert showing experiences from elsewhere, which can enhance the learning, maybe also add to the information which is not found in the course. But what we have done so far, any information that is found, the presentation that is made, we put it back into the course or into the platform to enhance the quality and the resources that are available on the platform. And we do also have a library for the youth, categorized for different ages, 5 to 9, 10 to 13, and for 14 to 18, just to provide information about different things about wildlife crime, to try and cultivate that spirit from the young age. So this information is categorized based on the age group to bring the youth into the fight from early on. As they grow, they already have these concepts and they can see how they can contribute. So the VukaLearn, like I said, is to enable practitioners, learners, and whoever is interested to access information at their own pace. It's free. Of course, it's not accredited, but it's free. You can access it at your own time, and you can enhance your capacity in various aspects of wildlife crime, also enhance your contribution towards combating it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Deborah. It's really interesting to learn that the VukaLearn courses are not just for journalists, but for all the other stakeholders that play a very important role on combating wildlife crime. Next up, I have a question for Oxpeckers' Executive Director, Fiona McLeod. Fiona, can you tell us what the main challenges for data journalism in the Southern African region are?
Thanks, Anissa. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, so data journalism is a growing practice around the world, not just in Southern Africa. And it's one of the pillars on which Oxpeckers was founded in 2012. As mentioned earlier, we combine data and geojournalism with the more traditional investigative reporting techniques. Data journalism helps to add accuracy, transparency, and accountability to the media profession. However, one of its biggest challenges, as you heard earlier, is that data journalists tend to assume that the information they want will be readily available. In our experience, this is often not the case, particularly when trying to access official or government data. You have to chase it down, sometimes resorting to freedom of information laws if they exist in your country, or the courts. This can take months, even years, and can be extremely tedious. A second challenge is that when you do finally get the information, it's usually not in the format you were hoping it to be in. Often it's redacted, and usually there are holes in it. It needs to be cleaned up, aggregated, and analyzed, verified before you can make sense of it and put it to proper use. Our wild-eye journey at Oxpeckers started years ago with 2 other data-driven digital tools available on the Oxpeckers website. These are called Poach Tracker and Rhino Court Cases. These platforms track incidents, arrests, and court cases related to rhino poaching. The basic premise of all these platforms is this. After all the hoo-ha we hear about seizures and arrests of wildlife criminals, what happens to them? Do they go on to face the rule of law, or do they get away with what they have done? The mission of the data journalists we work with in Southern Africa and elsewhere is to track this information and to share it in the public interest. The Oxpeckers mission is to train, advise, and support the journalists in this quest. Thank you, Andiso. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much for that, Fiona. Do we have any other questions from our participants? Right, if we don't have any other questions, I'll just move on to Roxanne, who's our resident data wrangler and project manager at WildEye. Roxanne, can you please tell us how important it is to set up and maintain a database in regional wildlife crime reporting?
Thanks for your question, Andiswa. I think Fiona kind of covered a lot of what I would have wanted to say and really explain why having this kind of a database is important in the first place. But what I will say is that, you know, the main thing I want to mention is she pointed out that often, you know, while we can access, or journalists, researchers can access this kind of information, it's not always in the format that we want it, and we can't work with it. And not everyone has the skills to clean and analyze that kind of information. And you'll be sitting with stacks and stacks of PDFs, and it kind of becomes useless information. So we do all of that for you with WildEye, and it makes and encourages other journalists, researchers, environmentalists. I think it's been said a few times, but WildEye isn't just for journalists. It's for anyone who's interested in wildlife crime. It skips over those steps for you and makes accessing this kind of information easier. And if we don't have this kind of information, how else are we going to know what's actually happening? How are we going to know that the laws that are in place are working? How else are we going to be able to hold the right people accountable? It'll just be a complete disaster. And then in terms of maintaining the actual database, this is why having a team of data wranglers like we have is so helpful. It means that they can access information in their countries in a way that they understand the context in which they're working, and can then provide WildEye with that information. And in terms of the kind of technical side of things, it's important to continuously update that data, especially with a tool that has something like an alert system. And Fiona mentioned this earlier. The idea behind WildEye is that a user can follow a specific case from seizure or arrest, all the way through the court system to the outcome of that court case, if there is a court case. So it's important to continuously update your data. It's important to keep your data clean and provide only good data. Otherwise, you could be providing information that is not verifiable, and you could spread misinformation, which is always a danger. So WildEye, for example, goes through a rigorous checking process before any information is added to it, or verification process, I should say. And again, just to be able to properly analyze and work with the data, it's important that you don't just get a data set, slap it on a map, and then you're done. It's a long-term project that requires a lot of work, which is why this kind of a project and this kind of a tool is so important, and why we are continuously bringing new people into this community and training people to work with this kind of information and these kinds of tools, so that they can continue on this journey of the fight against wildlife crime. I hope that answers your question, Andiswa.
Thank you so much, Roxanne, for those very important tips for working with data for a tool like WildEye. Please remember to pop us any questions that you have on the tool, on the VukaLearn course, on our Q&A box. You can also interact with us on the chat box if you have any comments or anything that you'd like to share with us. We'll now pose a question to Lucien Limache from the Legal Resources Center. Lucien was also one of our mentors on the course. Lucien, can you please unmute yourself and let us know what role data journalism can play in supporting legal processes when it comes to combating wildlife crime in the region?
Hi, thanks, Andy. So sorry, I just missed that question because I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. Would you mind repeating it?
No problem. Please tell us, what role can data journalism play in supporting legal processes in combating wildlife crime in the region?
Yeah, I mean, it can play a massive role in terms of combating wildlife crime. I mean, and it can do it in two ways. The one is obviously supporting trends that are being picked up by the data that's being put through to WildEye. You know, when you start seeing trends, obviously it becomes a lot easier for investigative departments and police officers to go and track and see what's going on in that area, and then hopefully come to some sort of arrest. And then the second important issue in terms of tracking that sort of information is we can see what the rate of prosecution is. We can see where government is potentially failing, why are prosecutions not happening, what's the reason behind that, and of course, expose further corruption or fraud if that's potentially happening. And then the last one, which is more directly to those who are tracking, the current arrests. Obviously, that assists, assists the communities, the people generally within the country to understand, what is particularly happening in their area, and obviously for them to be more alert to what potentially could happen, and to be more alert on those activities, and then hopefully maybe also try and some way or the other try and assist in terms of combating the wildlife crime in that area. And then I suppose the last point would be towards, for the lawyers, we can get access to this information. Lawyers typically need really strong evidence in court to make sure that prosecutions or civil claims or cases can actually happen, and having information that's at our fingertips in terms of this data from journalists helps the courts tremendously in terms of coming to some sort of verdict or judgment. Thank you, Andisa.
Thank you so much for that, Lucien. If we don't have any more questions or comments from the floor, then I guess that will bring us much closer to the end of today's session. Thank you so much to everyone for those insights. And I'll just keep the chat box and the Q&A box again, just to be sure if you don't have any questions. Okay, nothing for now. Right, so as you've all heard from our speakers today, wildlife crime is a global multi-billion-dollar illicit business. Legal systems, jurisprudence, accountability, and transparency are some of the most powerful mechanisms that we can use in countering this illicit trade. Oxpeckers and its team will continue to build the data sets that are now available on our WildEye platform. And we thank the USAID for its support in developing this project. We thank our guest presenters and extend an invitation to everyone who attended today to contact these presenters should they require more details or if they would like to make use of these tools and presentations. We also encourage you to use the WildEye tool and to share with us any information that you believe needs to be added to it and to be in the public domain. We also encourage journalists to do the VukaNow course on combating wildlife crime in Southern Africa. I myself, as a journalist, have also taken the course, and it's really interesting, and there's so much to learn, as Mbao had already shared with us earlier. You may also want to follow WildEye and Oxpeckers on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram for future webinars, tools, and opportunities. We will be sharing a link to the recording after this event. So if you would like to rewatch some of the presentations or to see some of the information that was shared, you will be able to view that on the recording. And then please do remember, before you sign off, that we'd like to ask you to take a minute to complete a few questions on our survey. We really, really appreciate your feedback. Lastly, we'd like to acknowledge USAID for a grant managed by Chemonics to conduct this event. Thank you so much for joining us today.